Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review, where we used a previous competition piece of mine and submit it to our AI DesignEye for analysis based on the principles and elements of design, which is how we are judged in competitions. And along with that analysis, I'll get some suggestions on what I could do to enhance the performance of this particular design. I've just realised as I'm looking at the recording that I've got black and I'm sitting in a black chair, so it'll just be a talking head, but it's very cold here today, and so I've got my warmest woolly top on, and you'll probably see the two sections of white, so I better show you the rest of it so that you know what it actually looks like. So it's my very famous Scottish cow, which I love. But let's get on to the design we're looking at today. This is an interesting design. It was a wall hanging, but we were not allowed to have any backing on it. So it was going to be displayed and judged on a black frame that they supplied, but we couldn't have the wall hanging with any backing as the structural support for it. So something of a challenge. This is the first time I've attempted one of these particular wall hangings, and I'm quite pleased with the result in that it does look like it is floating free on that background, which is one of the things I wanted it to do. So it was a wall hanging, no backing. The width was 40 centimetres, which is quite narrow for a design, and height of 1.2 metres, so or the drop in fact of 1.2 metres. Now you can probably tell that I didn't use all of that 1.2 metres, but I just thought that what I had put together was balanced. So it's based on a bit of material that you've seen me use in a number of other designs. It's a dried water hyacinth placemat, and as you can see, I've left some of it constructed at the top for the top part of the design, but I've left the supporting bits of dried material out so that we get that spray of dried material, and then looped the unstructured part of the deconstructed part, I knew it wasn't the right word, deconstructed part of the placemat, and looped it around itself. And within that, the bottom part of it, I've found this very small palm spathe that has got some dried Banksia slices on it. I've incorporated some dried sunflower heads, some wheat, and just a little bit of the Strelitzia leaves. And all of that was to increase the movement in the design, because the spiral gave me a great lot of movement, and I just needed to repeat that movement throughout the design. So let's go and see what DesignEye has got to say about this design. Looking at line, first of all, line is the dominant element in this design, and it's used with great effect. Braided fibres form looping, swirling lines that guide the eye throughout the vertical axis. The movement of the lines evokes a natural organic quality, mimicking vines, roots, or flowing wind. So sometimes we get a title for a mobile design that is turbulence, so I could even have used it for that particular design. Secondary straight lines are seen in the spikes of the seed heads and husks, creating textural contrast. And as you know, texture is my thing. I like to focus on that in designs, and particularly where I have chosen a very almost monochromatic colour scheme, that we need to have some contrast in the design in some other way, and often for me that is texture. Form. The forms used are highly stylised, veering into sculptural art. The large coiled circular mat serves as the main focal form, suggestive of a sun or floral motif. Other embedded natural forms, seed pods, wheat heads and bark, add irregularity and complexity while still being unified in form. Uniform. So what we've got here is the form itself is circular, so because of that, that's set by the placemat that I've used. But we've got sections of circles, we've got some straight lines, but they're part of the movement that is formed by the circular elements in the design. We've got the round form in the sunflower cedar heads, so it is a repetition of that form that is creating the natural flow in the design. Texture is an essential strength of this design. That's me. Braided fibres contrast with the roughness of the seed heads, spiky elements and smoothness of the palm spathe. The composition is highly tactile, adding visual interest in the absence of colour contrast. So exactly what I said earlier is that I need to focus on somewhere where there is contrast in the design, because that's one of the things that we would be judged on. And for me, texture is the easiest way to contrast. I struggle with the colour contrast sometimes. I prefer to work in the tints, tones and shades of one or two colours, but texture comes naturally to me. So that's where I focus. And in terms of your own designs, you should find one of these elements that works for you. Sometimes it's line, sometimes it's form for people. Colour, if you're inclined that way, but find something in these principles and elements of design that is the area that you're most comfortable in, and make sure that you develop that into a feature of your designs. So colour now. A restricted naturalistic palette is used. Neutrals such as beige, straw, ivory and soft brown. The subtle tonal differences between materials create depth without losing unity. This limited colour range allows texture, form and line to dominate. So exactly what we've been talking about all the way through is if colour's not your thing necessarily, just make sure that you are comfortable with a colour grouping and then focus on form or line or texture to create the interest in your design. Space. The designer has effectively worked with positive and negative space. The open circular braids at the lower section prevent heaviness, keeping the design airy despite the density of materials. The contrast between solid forms and surrounding negative space enhances visual rhythm. And this is really a really important point in terms of negative space, because we often don't think about it so much, but it becomes part of the design. So if you look at the top of the design, the section between the heavy circular area and the first part of the spiral, there's some little spikes there, but there's space there. And there's space in the bottom between all of the swirling elements that are down there. And so that space is not just empty space, it is part of the design. And that's when we talk about negative space, creating unity within the design, because it not only gives our eyes a place to rest, but it forms part of the patterns within the design. Balance. The design achieves asymmetrical balance. Visual weight is distributed top to bottom through scale and density. So what they're talking about is the scale, the larger scale of the circular top to the smaller scale of the open area and the spade. The top circular element is bold, but is counterbalanced by the winding linear structure and organic cluster below. I probably should have read the notes before I started talking. The design has visual stability while retaining movement, and that's very important, is that it looks visually stable. It doesn't look like it's going to fall apart, doesn't look like it's going to fall forward or fall off the wall, that it is unified in that way and stable, but there's still movement within the design because of those circular and spiralling lines. Rhythm. Rhythm is created by repetition of spirals and braids throughout the structure, as well as gradation in size and placement of elements. The smaller spirals and pods help the eye move naturally downward. The use of curves in a continuous flow supports this rhythm beautifully, and that's what I wanted. I wanted that my idea when I saw the placemat first of all was that if I took it apart and just had it swirling around, it would still look like it was unified, but there would be plenty of rhythm within it. And I just had to make sure that I didn't make it too measured and even in terms of the spirals, because that takes away, it makes it very static, very flat. And I needed that movement to create the rhythm. Dominance. The large braided circle is the dominant focal area, which is what I wanted. Secondary emphasis is created with seed heads and other natural materials along the vertical structure. So what it's saying is that although that top part is where you're drawn to first, if you draw the straight line down, you are drawn down into the design by other features within the design, but they don't crowd out the top part that's dominant. Contrast. While colour contrast is minimal, the contrast of texture, shape and density is strong. The round versus linear, braided versus spiky, open versus closed forms enhance visual variety. So even within that one colour palette, I've got some contrast in terms of the the textures naturally enough, and the open and closed areas, and that's where we talked about the negative space and that balance between the top and the bottom parts of the design that still gives us contrast but is not overwhelming in terms of the design. Unity is excellent. The natural materials and colour harmony are consistent and cohesive. The composition reads as one integrated concept rather than separate components assembled together. And that very much relies on that spiral that comes out from the top of the design, because that's the unifying element within the design. This design placed second, so I'd like some suggestions from our AI DesignEye about what I could do to improve the design. So number one was the slight adjustment to focal emphasis. The lower half might benefit from a slightly stronger secondary focal area, perhaps by tightening or overlapping one loop or slightly enlarging a seed pod to better guide the eye and reinforce flow. And I think a lot of it has to do with the placement of the spade at the bottom there. I think if I made that slightly more obvious than it is, that would help, or bring, because I've still got a reasonable amount of depth that I could work with in terms of the area that we were allowed. I could have brought a few more spirals down lower underneath that, so that it was almost like a stepping stone down from the circle to the spade to the next part of the design. So that's something that I would consider and play with. Number two, support clarity and wall hanging readability. Consider adding a more obvious or designed hanging mechanism, even if disguised, that visually reinforces that this is a wall piece rather than a suspended sculpture. Now, I included this because I wanted to talk to you about staging of your materials. So when you're in a competition, particularly if it's a hanging piece, whether it's a mobile or a wall hanging, the organisers will tell you, or should tell you, how it's going to be displayed for judging. In this case, we knew that it was a black background and that there would be a hook for us to hang it on. So what I could have done, and what it's saying, is to make it obvious. So use the hook, but have something that brought the wall hanging out away from the hook, so that it was obvious that it was separate to the design, because as it says at the moment, it just looks like it's suspended in midair. And if we want to reinforce the idea that it is a wall hanging, then it should have something that shows that it's attached to the wall for judging. Number three is the top margin management. If being judged in a formal context, the label's proximity to the design could affect the visual impact. Ensure it's placed to avoid interfering with the viewer's first impression. And this is another good tip for you. At the top of the placemat, you can see there's a little white square, and that's my competition number, my competitor's number. We are required to display that somewhere in the design, and with a wall hanging it is quite difficult because you can't put it on the floor because it'll blow away, so you've got to put it somewhere within the design so that it's obvious to the judges. What I should have done is taken a pin with me and put it in with a pin further above it or below it, rather, so that it doesn't look like it's part of the design or included within the design. So that's a good tip, just a general tip in terms of when you're staging your competition pieces. So the overall impression for this design, this is an elegant and sophisticated wall hanging that showcases the beauty of natural materials transformed into art. The piece strongly supports its title, using refined craftsmanship and design intelligence to elevate humble elements into a visually poetic and structurally well-resolved form. It speaks of connection to nature, artisan weaving, and contemporary organic sculpture. So it's a pretty good feedback from AI about the design. There are some things, a couple of things that I could improve in terms of its presentation and the design itself. And so I'm happy with that education that I've got about this design. As I said, it placed second, so now I know what to do to refine it a little bit more to make sure that it fits into the category of getting a first place. As always, I encourage you to have one of your own designs analysed through our system. All you need to do is go to the website, floralartreview.com, and follow the instructions that are there. It does give you a written report along exactly the same lines as I present to you each week, and it will also be reviewed by a human judge just to make sure that all of the plant material has been identified correctly, or that it is not trying to lead you down a different path, that it's talking about competition entries. So with that, I will leave you for this week. Join me again next time. For now, I'm Kimberly, and this is Floral Art Review.